So Chaya has been working on the idea of, she'd originally started with trying to parameterize some dyes that were conjugated to amino acids. There were a lot of problems with how Charm had been doing this in the past, so we thought we might do this on an automated manner. The Bayesian method allows us to overcome minima and find good global parameters. And the general approach is that she's been thinking about both a bespoke torsion generator for individual molecules, which is something that a lot of people can use immediately, as well as how do we fit all of the refit all the torsions in Smirnov and beyond. So one of the things that we think we need to do is first fragment these molecules, right? And find. Oh, sorry. The way that this works generally is that the functional form is just a sum of these cosine. It's basically a lower order Fourier expansion. And then Charm would turn on and off the individual things, like whether we want the one-fold, two-fold, three-fold, four-fold, or six-fold, based upon chemical intuition. You would basically guess which ones are supposed to be on or off. None of us could figure out how to do this by hand, so she started to have this discrete and combinatorial optimization problem at the same time. What's also weird is that as you're doing one of these torsion scans, you'll notice that if you do it for scanning through, I think this is for the same mutane, there's different energetics that contribute to this that you can subtract off. So you can do subtract off the non-bonded contributions and then just fit the residual torsion energies. But when you do that, you see very weird things where, this is for a Charm CGen-FF force field for butane, the dominant features that contribute to the torsional barrier in butane are actually all involving terminal hydrogens, which is very weird. Whereas the carbon-carbon backbone contributes nothing at all. And so this is maybe not unexpected if you think that the Lennard-Jones is supposed to supply most of the barrier, but to me it was highly unexpected that most of the driving force for this central torsion would be coming from this hydrogen over here interacting with this carbon. That seems very bizarre.
Your point being that of the non-bondeds involved, that would be the dominant, or that the non-bondeds themselves dominate and the torsion itself is weak.
So this is the contribution from the torsional contributions, because remember, across the internal torsion, we're including the average over all possible 9-fold torsions that go through this bond. Right? There's I have carbon, 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 carbon. I have hydrogen, carbon, 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 and then you average over all 9 of those. That's how these typically we compute the torsion energies.
Yeah, so you're only talking about the intrinsic torsions, not the non-bondeds.
Yeah. So once you subtract out the non-bondeds, so you look at the contributions from each one of these.
Sure.
I would have expected the hydrogen components to be minimal, but that's not the case for Charm.
Yeah.
And this was a surprising finding. So again, it may be not unexpected, but I think this gets into something very fundamental that Chaya spoke about on one of our previous calls, where in order for these to generalize, you actually probably need to do very large number of molecules so that the hydrogen, carbon, carbon, carbon actually fits in all of the possible contexts that might occur and is minimized if it's not supposed to contribute as much as the carbon, 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 carbon. So there's, I think, a big failure for why torsions don't generalize is probably because of this degeneracy and the inability for typical minimization or optimization schemes to really find a good global optimum or a good free energy optimum across many, many molecules for all the torsions at the same time. So I think we might have an advantage in using a Bayesian method that can actually overcome some of these issues. All right, so she's been working on automating fragmentation and then automating the 1 and 2D QM torsion scans. And then she's mostly focused on, or has machinery working now, once you subtract off the non-bonded parts for all the configurations that you've done the QM for, to very rapidly use something like PyMC to run Markov chain Monte Carlo on some likelihood function. And our likelihood function, I don't think she has written down, but the basic idea is we have a nuisance parameter, which we try to minimize, which is just the unknown uncertainty. Let's call it sigma. And it's just proportional to sigma inverse. So it means that log of sigma has a uniform prior. So we don't know what magnitude of the error we should be expecting. But other than that, it's a simple Gaussian likelihood function where sigma controls the standard error. We assume that all of the configurations have the same error. That's probably not a good assumption because we only care about the ones at the bottom of the torsional profile. But that's what she's done so far. We can come up with better models, obviously. She was mostly been trying to make it fast enough and come up with enough automation to automate all of the other components of this so that we can actually get a data set to work with. So she enumerated some desiderata for each of these fragments. You don't want it to be So you don't want to fragment in the middle of ring systems. You don't want to fragment in the middle of extended pi systems. Some functional groups you don't want to break up. On the other hand, we want to keep the fragment small enough that we can do one, and Lieping has really convinced us that 2 torsion drives are very critical. So if you have a fragment that has 2 torsions you can drive at the same time, that was super successful for amino acids, and it's probably something we want to carry forward for small molecules. These are all other things that we need to have at least one rotatable bond. And so she's come up with a modified version of something suggested by Pfizer, where for each rotatable bond she kind of builds out in all directions, has some rules about what to keep on either side, and then how to keep adding more onto this central torsion. So when you take a kinase inhibitor like imatinib, these are the sorts of fragments you get. I'm not sure why there's boxes around some of them, but not others. But the basic idea is that the ones drawn in dark are the ones that you end up with as fragments. And they look like what we would expect. They have functional groups in them. They're not cutting in weird areas. There's some rules that she said she needs to tweak, but it looks like it's a good starting point for taking something like AlloDrugBank, starting to run it through this fragmenter, coming with a ton of fragments, making them unique, and then starting to do tons of QM on them as we drive with 1 and 2 torsions. She did find some edge cases where we got weird behavior, like in this case, it just picks the NH, but then nothing on the other side, and I'm not sure that that's what we want. Excluding the CF3, because that's treated like a methyl rotor, I think. Though it's also fine in this case over here. Some other things where she thinks it's cutting at other odd moieties, like maybe we wanted to keep the NH here or something like that. I'm not quite sure.
Is there a metric that says, oh, I've done it right, or I've done it not so right?
It's just about how well the torsions then generalize back to the full molecule, right? So we have to figure out what is the objective here in terms of, or the metric that we measure. But chemically, these look possibly not so bad. She identified these as failures, though. And then there's functional groups we probably don't want to fragment. So she was trying to compile a list of things that we don't want to break up.
What kind of capping groups do you put on the fragments?
She just puts hydrogens on anything that. So if it's not in black, it's just a hydrogen.
That would create some extra hydrogen bond donors and stuff.
Yes, so that's going to be problematic right here, especially, right? So that
You want either halogen or a methyl.
You want to cap it with a methyl on that particular species that he just pointed to. Right?
Yeah, so in this case you want to, so I think we need to identify a capping solution for how we want to identify.
I'm a little surprised that Pfizer didn't cap that with a methyl.
This is not their exact algorithm, so I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, that said, the torsion in question is actually between the carbonyl and phenyl. So in that case, it's possible that the methylamide might be okay.
So would we want to cap everything with the phenyl, like even put phenyl?
Changes significantly because you're replacing carbon with hydrogen, so you're changing the electronegativity quite a bit.
So yes, but I wonder how much the torsional potential would change. I'm not saying it wouldn't. I'm just saying I'd take maybe Pfizer took a look at it and made a decision.
Perhaps you'd also be interested in joining in the group that
Yeah, I was
discusses
just
this
gonna
in more
say,
detail.
let's get the Chaya is not even in the room, so
Yeah.
She'll
She'll watch the Twitch live stream later. I have 1.5 minutes, so I think that's it. I'll just end quickly.
I think you should get him on it too, if you're willing.
I didn't know they allowed those in the building.
The rest of us
Is it chemistry one? Or something?